Hello. Welcome to Code Name Madeleine with Arthur J. Magida. I'm Amanda Olkey, Director of Adult Education here at the International Spy Museum. Now, before I introduce Arthur more fully, I want to note that we do have a small exhibit dedicated to Noor Khan in our World War II gallery, and she is such an inspiring figure. She has truly become an icon to our staff and many of our visitors. So it is always exciting when we get to tell her story more fully. We share Arthur's passion for this heroic person. In addition to writing Code Name Madeleine, a Sufi Spy in Nazi-occupied Paris, and other books, Arthur has been a visiting professor of journalism at Georgetown University and a professor of writing at the University of Baltimore, a consultant to several PBS documentaries and to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. He's been a columnist for BeliefNet.com, a contributing correspondent to PBS's Religion and Ethics, Newsweekly, editorial director of Jewish Lights Publishing, senior editor of the Baltimore Jewish Times, and an environmental reporter for National Journal. So he cares about the planet and the people. So we love that. Now, after Arthur's presentation, we will turn to your questions. And we have a mic right over there, a standing mic. Please do go to the mic because we hope to post this on our YouTube channel in a week or so. And if we can't hear your questions, then neither can our YouTube audience. So thank you so much for your cooperation with that. Many people feel they have loud voices and they don't need it, but we would love to capture what you have to say. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Arthur Magida. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, everybody in front of me at this very moment. I just had visions of my entire life flashing in front of me, Amanda. It was very disturbing. I also thought that this obviously is a guy who cannot hold a job, and that's rather sad. But thanks to Nora and a few other people in my life, I've managed to hunker down and actually get a few things done, along with a blur with everything else going on. I'm really grateful, Amanda, having what's turning into our second annual Noor Inayat Khan event at the Spy Museum. Last year, I Zoomed, also on June 16th. Today's is also on June 16th. And there's a pattern here. I don't know what's going on. There's a pattern. June 16th is the day that Noor was flown into France to be a secret agent for the British. This year, June 16th resonates even more deeply than last year. Amanda and everybody else, today is the 80th anniversary of Noor's momentous flight. So thank you doubly, Amanda. This year, last year. I don't know if they're in the room, but thank you to two of Amanda's talented and hardworking team members, Shanna Altmans and Erin Dietrich. I could tell from Baltimore the effort they were placing into this. And beyond that, thanks to the Spy Museum, this unique and very imaginative facility that's determined to help us understand a craft, espionage, that's often misunderstood. Thanks largely, I think, to Mr. Bond. I asked Amanda, by the way, if I should thank, I don't know, Nathan Hale, who is our country's first spy, who the British hung for his efforts. And Amanda very adamantly said, don't thank Nathan Hale for getting in over his head. We can do better. Thank Noor. So I think that's a great idea, Amanda. And we'll get to Mr. Hale another day, certainly not this one. But let's thank Noor Inayat Khan. Noor was a fascinating, surprising, inspiring young woman who always conducted herself with the utmost integrity. never lost her hope, never lost her conviction that the world could be a better place, and that she somehow could help guide it there in some small way. And though Noor was killed in 1944, Noor is not an artifact frozen in history. The powerful example of her life can influence how we conduct ourselves today, person to person, nation to nation, political faction to political faction. Her example is especially potent today as we face what seem to be endless wars and famines, name-calling and taunts, all fraying what we used to call, and really cherished, our national identity as well as the international order. Many lessons can be drawn from Noor about such matters. Lessons of morality, faith, honor, truth, love. The only way to do that, though, is to first ask, who was Noor Inayat Khan? Well, once upon a time, there was a princess, a Sufi, a mysticism that most people say originated in Islam. The princess was Noor, a young woman who saw the world coming apart and tried to heal it. Noor was a true global citizen. Her mother, Memphis, first slide, please, if you will. There we are, thank you. Her mother, Ora, was an American who lived first in Arizona, then in New York with her brother. Noor's father, Hazrat Inayat Khan, through whom Noor inherited a photo of Noor's father, Hazrat Inayat Khan. There we go, that's Noor's father, Sufi master. Through him, Hazrat, Noor inherited her regal lines. Hazrat Inayat Khan was not only an Indian, but also the man who introduced Sufism, this particular brand of mysticism, to the West in 1910. And Noor herself, next slide, was born in Moscow, January 1st, 1914, raised in London for a few years, then moved with their family to a spiritual cocoon in Suresnes, which is a small village directly opposite Paris. Memphis. If people want to know why I keep saying Memphis, it's not because I really hunger to be in that city right now. It's because
I'm the one who's actually doing it.
What'd you say? Oh, you're doing it. What happened to Memphis? I love saying Memphis.
Well, you can say Memphis.
Okay, from now on, you are Memphis. What happened to Amanda? Damn, Amanda ducked out when I need her. Okay, anyway, this is the home that Noor and her family moved to shortly after the First World War. And Amanda, or Memphis, or wherever you are right now, across there, you can see the home in the upper left-hand corner of that photo. There's Noor's mother sitting down. I have no idea who's determined to keep her back to us, but there's Noor's father, Hazrat Inayat Khan, in those white robes. Next slide, Amanda. There's Noor, the tallest one of those four, with her three siblings. Going downward, we have Noor, then Valiant, then her sister Claire, then her brother, whose last name, excuse me, escapes me at this moment. But you could tell this was a girl who loved her siblings. This was a girl who, along with her siblings, loved to play in the house itself and then this vast field across from the house. And all this is going on across the river from Paris in the 1920s, where there was great artistic ferment. Yes, Noor also was a significant little artist. She did this about the age of 5 or 6. I think there's another one as well. She was a very talented young lady, and she wrote to music along with doing wonderful art. And she had no idea, her family had no idea, nobody had any idea about what lay ahead in her future, what lay ahead in anybody's future. But Thank you, but the years that she spent in Suren at this home called Fazel Manzil, House of Blessings, were among the happiest and most settled in her life. A few minutes ago, I said, once upon a time, for a reason. Over time, Noor's story has become almost mythical to me. A princess who lived in what's almost a castle, as we saw a few minutes ago, that's across the river from an illustrious, almost magical city who went on to become a great hero. Stories like that are the stuff of legends and make-believe. The difference is that this one is real. Noor's American mother, her Indian father, her Russian birth, her French and British upbringing made her American, Indian, Russian, British, French. Slash, 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 slash between all of those. As united a blend of nations as could be found in just about any one individual. And somehow, Noor held all that together, integrating all those nations, all those cultures, all those traditions into a unique, distinct personality and transmuting herself into becoming one of the most unlikely secret agents of World War II. Unlikely because Noor was as ethereal an agent as any side fielded during the war. Thanks to her father, the Sufi master, Hazrat Inayat Khan, Noor practiced what I call a very sensible, non-transcendental mysticism. Her father taught, to become an angel is not very difficult. To live in the world, in all the difficulties, all the struggles of the world, and to be human at the same time, that, he said, is very difficult. If we become that, he continued, then we become the miniature of God on earth. For Noor and for her father, spirituality didn't reside in another realm. Spirituality was here, it was now, and it was very real. Noor grew into a deceptively strong-willed young woman. She wrote music, as I said. She wrote poetry. I have piles of it. She wrote children's short stories. A collection was published 1939, just before the war started. She wrote essays about faith and religion, and she always put others before herself. Service, in fact, was a keystone of her faith. For Noor, and these are her words now, the essence of spirituality and mysticism is readiness to serve the person next to us. Noor's mysticism did not renounce the world. It embraced it with all its messiness, all its possibilities, all its pleasures and all its joys, all its disappointments and all its triumphs. Everything was grist for Noor's mill, and everything she absorbed and interpreted through her rare and unique prism. And that, at least I think, is the opposite of how many people approach their spirituality. They wall themselves off from the world, placing gauzy, righteous barriers between themselves and the jostle of daily life. Noor embraced the jostle. She embraced the jarring and the unpredictability of what we've all gotten ourselves into. And that's why I call her an example of spirituality in action. Everything to Noor, everything was holy, and everything was spiritual, and everything was as ordinary as you could imagine it. She looked at life with unwavering hope. And hope, I think and believe and am virtually certain, hope was Noor's banner, her beacon. She carried it so humanity could redeem itself. So when the time came to serve during World War II, Noor was ready to become the most improbable agent in Britain's top secret agency, the Special Operations Executive. I'm just going to call it SOE from here on. Noor was improbable because she was diminutive, 5'4", and barely 100 pounds. That's about as slight as it. Do you meet that qualification? Okay. We're recruiting people for the SOE later. Thank you. Anyway, this is about as slight as it comes. And improbable because the SOE or any other agency did not habitually recruit shy, quiet, introspective mystics, although maybe they shouldn't, be a different world. Even more improbable because it didn't usually send on missions, agents whose trainers said were not overburdened with brains. That's what one of Noor's handlers said about her. And this guy, by the way, just didn't like the idea of women being sent out to do men's work, espionage and sabotage and working behind enemy lines. So not too much up in poor Noor's noggin, although you can be sure she was smarter than this guy who thought she didn't have anything upstairs. And despite all that, on June 16th, 1943, 80 years ago today, Noor was the first female radio operator the SOE flew into France. She held the Gestapo at bay for months while lugging her 30-pound radio around with her just about wherever she went, and never varying from the ethical principles of Sufism she'd learned from her father. And when she was finally caught, Noor told the Germans nothing. She won their respect even after trying to escape twice from a Gestapo prison that was in the center of Paris. Next slide. Gestapo prison in Paris, that's 84 Avenue Foch, for those of you who are planning a summer vacation in the City of Light. Noor was arrested mid-October 1943. She was taken immediately to this mansion, which the Nazis has turned into a prison. She was taken to the 5th floor. She was interrogated for a few hours. As I said already, she gave them nothing that they wanted. And when the session was over, she asked if she could use the ladies' room. And they pointed to a room down the hallway. She went in there. She almost closed the door when one of the Gestapo agents said, "No, we keep a brick in the doorway so we can see what our prisoners are doing." Noor insisted they remove the brick. The Gestapo agent insisted they keep it. Noor insisted, and the brick was removed. Noor was in there for 4, 5, 10, 12 minutes. Gestapo agent began to wonder what happened to Noor Inayat Khan. He opened one of the other windows way up there on the 5th floor, and, well, you said I could walk around. I should take the mic with me, but I can't. Anyway, going just below all those windows on the top floor, you see a black line. That's actually a rain gutter. The Gestapo agent opened one of those windows, and he saw Noor balancing 5 floors up, trying to escape, keeping his voice quiet and relaxed so he didn't disturb Noor too much or disturb himself. He didn't want to lose their new prize prisoner. He talked Noor back into the building. And one of his arguments was something like, "Noor, if you fall, your mother will be in such pain." And he knew from mail that they intercepted from Noor back to her mother in London how close Noor was to her mother. So that's the first time that Noor tried to escape. And the second time was maybe 6 weeks later. That was done with 2 other prisoners, and this time, instead of foolishly trying to balance themselves on a rain gutter, they went through a skylight that was in each of their cells, and then the back of this building, they went down sheets that had been tied together, then balcony to balcony on another building, then finally down to the ground floor. And guess who was waiting for them? And guess who took them back to 84 Avenue Foch? So that's first and second. And after the second, Noor was taken by train to a prison in Germany, where she was locked up in solitary and shackled wrist to wrist, ankle to ankle, 2 sets of chains, chained to each other so she could barely stand. 10 months later, Noor was taken by train to Dachau. The next day, in a shallow pit about 100 feet from Dachau's crematorium, Noor was executed with a bullet to her head. This was actually taken at Dachau at a memorial service for Noor. Noor served willingly and wholeheartedly and with a bravery and a spiritual perspective that were uncommon throughout the war. Throughout any war, Noor's perspective confounded a friend of mine, a psychologist who I've known since 5th grade. All the good psychologists come out of 5th grade. My friend Kenny insisted that Noor had a death wish, an irrational impulse to extinguish herself. I told Kenny there was nothing irrational about what Noor did. Yes, she knew that radio operators were the linchpin of the SOE. Without them, the SOE could not communicate with the agents that it smuggled into Europe, coordinating activities and planning strategy and dropping supplies and money. And yes, she knew that the average lifespan of a radio operator in France was 6 weeks, and Noor, by the way, lasted 4 months, not the usual 6 weeks. But she believed, to quote Noor, that sacrificing yourself for others bathes the world in a love which purifies and heals the suffering of humanity. That's not how undercover agents talk. Noor's goal was not to eliminate herself. Her goal was to heal the world, to ease its suffering, to make it better. Noor didn't have a death wish, as my psychologist friend said. Noor had a life wish. Researching Code Name Madeleine, my book about this individual, I was struck by a phrase Noor wrote when she was in her mid-20s. Noor said, "The heart must be broken for the real to come forth." World War II broke Noor's heart, and the real came forth. In a world torn apart, Noor found her destiny and she found her calling. And that's why hers is a story of courage, faith, resilience. A story that inspired those who knew her, a story that can inspire us now, in our own chaotic, turbulent, unsettling, exhausting age. The heart must be broken for the real to come forth, Noor wrote. It's my favorite quote from her. My favorite, that I use it twice in the book. About 175 pages away from each other. Readers may not remember it when they come to the second reference, so I wanted to reinforce that on them. It's as true today as it was more than 8 decades ago when Noor wrote it. Every day, for many of us, our hearts are broken, whether because of deaths or severe illnesses, from COVID, or the petulance and mendacity of certain politicians, or the varying and discordant visions of what this country can be, should be, better be. Every day, the real comes forth, and every day, our hearts are broken. Every day, we are summoned to bring forth the best in ourselves, much as Noor did. Among the many treats of writing Code Name Madeleine was discovering just extraordinary stories wherever I looked, and stories I did not expect when I set out, stories that give the arc of Noor's life new and intriguing dimensions. A few examples. Okay. Here we have sweet little Noor, maybe she's 5 years old. Because I had access to the sweet little girl's report cards, I was so happy when I found them. I don't know where mine are, but I know where Noor's are. I discovered that her talent for writing and storytelling was noticed as early as kindergarten. That's when Noor's teacher praised her for how well she, quote, listens and enjoys stories and can tell one herself. Other than that, Noor had some of the same faults that all the rest of us have, especially in kindergarten. She was, quote, too talkative. She was a real chatterbox, and she had difficulty concentrating. Her mind, one teacher complained, needed steadying and strengthening. As her life went on, Noor more than made up for this. Without a steady, strong mind, the Gestapo would have caught Noor days after she arrived in Paris, not months after she got there. And I learned that in 1940, Noor and her mother and Noor's siblings fled from the Germans in her brother's MG. But how was that possible? How could 4 people squeeze into a British sports car of that era? I love sport cars. I have one myself, but not an MG. And as far as I knew, MGs had room for 2 people, no more. If you would, Amanda. Well, after tracking down the head of the MG Car Club Limited in England, I learned that MG had produced models like this with jump seats between 1922 and 1933. After more digging, I learned that Noor's mother sat in the front passenger seat. Noor's brother, Valiant, who owned this car, was right behind that steering wheel. And Noor and her sister were in the jump seat that, unfortunately, I don't have a photo of. I also learned that this MG, where I wrote, the MG was a great car for a jolly picnic in the country. It was not a great car, I thought, for fleeing from the Nazis, if you would, Amanda. This is what was happening in Paris as Noor and her family were leaving in their mini automobile. Soon after leaving Suresnes, this town where Noor and her family lived, Noor's brother turned the car onto roads filled with broken down cars and broken down people. Some broken down people. It was filled with infantrymen humiliated by their rout, dead horses lying in ditches, thousands of people on bicycles weaving in and out of the rabble, farm wagons piled high with tables and chairs and suitcases, and a grandmother being pushed in a wheelbarrow. There was a woman carrying a cat, another woman carrying a bird in a cage, mothers pushing babies in prams, children carrying toys, dolls, blankies. Cars overheated or crept along. The flood of humanity was too dense for the autos to move any faster. And everywhere, mattresses were lashed to the tops of Renaults and Citroëns and Mercedes. On the top of one car, the body of a grandmother who had died en route was tied to a mattress because her son could not bear to leave her alongside the road. Germans in Messerschmitt circled above, unsure whether to strafe the refugees or let them collapse in exhaustion. Leaving the MG in tours with a friend, the Khans found seats on a train. And the train, Noor wrote, was noisy and crowded with frantic young mothers with tear-stained eyes carrying their sleeping youngsters. They knew not, Noor wrote, where they were heading. They were just running toward freedom if freedom was to be found. For the little ones, Noor continued, France should be saved from enemy hands at any price. I have wiped the eyes of some, given water to others. The distress of a human being is impressive, said Noor, but the distress of a whole nation? Those whose hearts have not beaten and suffered with this cannot know what it means. Now, I'm convinced that sitting in the jump seat that we didn't see a minute. No, in the jump seat that we didn't see a minute ago. Sitting in the jump seat of that. Oh, yeah, there we go. That we still can't see. But thanks for trying, Amanda. Sitting in the jump seat of the MG, passing thousands of refugees, looking them right in the eye because that's the height where she was in that seat, wiping the eyes of the children on that train. All of that strengthened the pledge that Noor had made to herself and to one of her brothers. Somehow, she would return to France to fight the Germans. I also learned that a few weeks after the SOE flew Noor into France, today, 80 years ago, she knocked on neighbors' doors in the village where she lived before the war. She was hoping that somebody would let her in so she could send messages on her radio back to England. A number of people turned her away, people she'd known her entire life. What Noor didn't know was that she was surrounded by Germans. In a massive 19th century fort just a few blocks away, a fort where Noor's brothers and sisters had played as children. Next one. Yeah. The Germans were executing members of the resistance. That August in 1943, when Noor was begging neighbors to let her use a radio from their homes, Joseph Axelrod was executed in that fort, and Marcel Couillon, and Jules Godfrey, and Jules Géant, and Michel Legois, and more. The next month, Abel Blanchard, Marcel Blinard, and more were killed. By the end of the war, almost 1,200 Frenchmen would be killed in that fort on that spot. And I, in fact, have stood on that spot. Noor also didn't know that every time she returned to the home in Suresnes that did let her transmit messages to England, she walked through a gauntlet of Germans. 33 Gestapo agents were living on that same block. 28 were living in Noor's family's home that was right around the corner. More were living in 17 other homes a block away. Everywhere Noor walked, there were Germans. But what, I ask, and this is really important, what for Noor did fighting the Germans mean, if you would? Fighting meant never forgetting that she was a Sufi, never forgetting the rules of chivalry that her father taught when Noor was 12 years old. These rules emphasize modesty, humility, empathy, and discipline. A few examples. Her father taught, do not neglect those who depend upon you. Hold your head high in all circumstances. Break not your word of honor, whatever may befall. Consider duty as sacred as religion. And two that stumped me, given who she was up against, the Nazis, be prejudiced against no one, and bear no malice against your worst enemy. This was a knighthood. They literally referred to this as chivalry and being a knight. This was a knighthood of conscience, spirit, courage, persistence, and dignity. Another rule was to harm no one for your own benefit. Well, many people have called Noor a pacifist. She wasn't. She didn't believe in violence. She tried to avoid it, but she didn't fully believe in passive resistance either. And while Noor admired Gandhi's campaign for India's independence, she knew that pacifism had its limits. Fighting the British as a pacifist, as Gandhi did, made sense. Fighting Hitler as a pacifist was suicide. And further souring Noor on Gandhi was his cavalier attitude towards the Nazis. Gandhi urged Jews in Europe to pray for Hitler and to resist him without violence, though that would guarantee their massacre. Massacre is Gandhi's word, not mine. And he urged the British to stop fighting Germany, though he literally said a Nazi victory could cost the English their lives and their homes. Repeatedly, Gandhi offered to mediate between the Allies and Hitler, who Gandhi stated was not a bad man. Noor knew that Hitler was a bad man. She knew how the Nazis were treating the Jews and others, and yet her infatuation with pacifism was sufficient for her brother to question if it would require her to remain neutral as the Germans were pouring into France in May and June of 1940. Can we just stand by and watch what the Nazis were doing, Valiant asked Noor. If the Nazis came to the door and they took 20 people, 20 Jews, who they planned to kill, would you be an accomplice in their deaths if nonviolence stopped you from killing the Germans and preventing those deaths? Noor couldn't stand by and watch. And that's why she ended up in the jump seat of that legendary MG, hoping somehow to get to England, from England back to France, to fight the Nazis, and to fight for them in her own way. Well, Noor this thing just go off? Sorry. Noor was ideal in some ways for the SOE, other than being diminutive and not having too many brains. She knew French. She knew France. She knew French customs. She was brave, braver than she seemed when the SOE first recruited her. But to be a good agent, Noor was put in the position of possibly bending one of her father's cardinal rules: never lie. Her father taught, truth is all the religion there is. True religion is the sea of truth. Well, maybe, but undercover agents can't be truthful. Without deceit and guile, an agent was a dud, probably a dead dud. The SOE flew Noor into France anyway, this night 80 years ago. They flew her over on a small plane called a Lysander. This is a terrible photo that I took of a Lysander that's in the Air and Space Museum over by Dulles Airport. And the first time, there's another photo, I think, as well, of a Lysander. This thing is like the size of a Mini Cooper, and I couldn't imagine entrusting my life. I couldn't imagine Noor entrusting her life to such a tiny airplane, especially with Germans below who are keeping their eyes out for you. Anyway, within a week after Noor landed in France, the Germans caught almost everybody in her cell. She was essentially on her own now. And that's when her real adventure began, and when she truly encountered the cost of her mission. As I wrote in my book, Noor knew that we pay a price in life, the price we pay to receive life. If paying that price was not, as she said, the highest and most inconceivable joy, then it was not, she said, a willing offering. Until the middle of June 1943, when Noor was flown into France, the price she paid in life, the gifts she had offered the world, were mostly her music and her stories and her love for others and her paintings. In Paris that summer, hiding and on the run from the Germans, she began to more fully appreciate that the most profound gift was, in her words, expressed in sacrifice. Most sacrifices, Noor believed, are relatively small, maybe involving wealth or material possessions. But the greatest sacrifice, she said, was the sacrifice of one's self. And the best and the truest sacrifice was for humanity. And this is one of the key lessons we can learn from Noor, and why, for a page or two in my book, When I bring up Noor's idea of sacrifice, the action essentially stops. I want my readers, like Noor, to ask themselves, do we have courage? Are we willing to make sacrifices? Are we willing to make the final sacrifice, any kind of sacrifice? Well, that's what I hope readers will ask themselves. I never know what goes on in their minds. I never know what goes on in my own minds. I also wrote that Noor's father urged her to look at humanity, quote, without thinking they are German or English or French. They are all, he told Noor, equally dear to the enlightened soul. To these souls, Judgment Day does not come after death. For that soul, every day is a judgment day. Without thinking they're German or English or French deserves repetition, and it deserves emphasis. Noor made no distinction between these. She wasn't fighting against the Germans. She wasn't fighting for the English or for the French. She was fighting for humanity. A pure act of selflessness, of compassion, and of empathy. In Paris, as an SOE agent, Noor built new cells. She ensured that money and arms kept flowing to the resistance. She made sure that she sent messages to London about German troop movements and which factories and airports should be bombed. And she informed England about the frequencies that the Germans were using to communicate with their submarines and much, much more. One of her messages was indispensable to D-Day, which was a full year away. She asked London to send a plane to pick up 2 French agents. They had a map of German defenses in Brittany. 2 weeks before D-Day, Free French paratroopers jumped into Brittany, teamed up with the resistance, dynamited petrol dumps, and destroyed most of the Nazis' communication network in that region. This slowed down almost 100,000 German troops desperate to get to Normandy on D-Day and stop the flood of Allied soldiers who were pouring into France. Noor's contributions to victory were indispensable, and they are largely unknown. When she wasn't sending messages or running from one safe house to another, Noor had some very unique and once in a while, really peculiar adventures. There was one member of the resistance who was especially close to Noor, a man named Pierre Vianon. He was only 3 years older than Noor, but he kept a close eye on her. When her radio broke, he got it fixed in his electronics factory. When she needed a place to send messages from other than Noor's friend's place in Suresnes, he let her use his apartment. And he thought really fast when she needed to keep her cover hidden from Germans or from collaborators. Occasionally, Noor and Pierre met on a small patio outside a cafe called, in English at least because my French is bad, non-existent, cafe called At the King of Beer. And anybody who looked at the exterior of this cafe would have a hard time not smiling. On the second floor facade, there's a statue of the King of Beer himself holding up a stein of beer, probably his favorite brew. Another sculpture, this time way up on the roof, is a large stork right next to a chimney. Well, Noor and Pierre are sitting right in front of this restaurant in a small cafe. Oh, I didn't know it was on there already. Food. You sit in the corner until you're dismissed for recess, which for you is going to be a long, long time from now. Darn, you ruined my surprise. Yes, it's now a McDonald's. Anyway, my story is that, 1, in 1943, it was not a McDonald's. 2, as Pierre and Noor were sitting on that patio, which is now hidden by those bushes, probably fake, Pierre noticed that his uncle was walking towards them on the sidewalk. And Pierre knew that his uncle was a collaborator and very fond of the Vichy government. which was not good for Noor or Pierre. So Pierre knew that Noor spoke with just a trace of an accent, and she had just a slight tinge to her skin. She wasn't as white as almost everybody in this room or almost everybody in Paris at the time. So he didn't want to give his uncle a chance to come over and force Pierre to introduce Noor to him. So he grabbed Noor and gave her a real big smooch. I hear that's what people do in French cafes anyway. So the uncle walked by, but out of the corner of his eye, he caught Pierre necking with this unidentified woman in the cafe. And the uncle went straight to Pierre's apartment. Pierre's wife was there. The uncle told the wife what he'd seen at McDonald's, or maybe then it was a Burger King, I don't know. Pierre finally got home. Uncle's there, wife's there. Wife is irate. She starts throwing water bottles at poor Pierre. Finally, the uncle leaves, and Pierre could tell his wife who he was meeting and why he was hugging her. Such tension, but that's l'amour, and that's France. So yeah, a daughter took that photo of me. She was in Paris as I was working on the book. I told her exactly where to go, and she's boycotting this today. She'd rather be swimming with the manatees in Florida. I don't know why. Around the same time that Noor and Pierre met at that cafe, Noor defended a member of the resistance who others were saying had betrayed her to the Gestapo. I can't believe he would do it, Noor kept repeating. No, no, no. He did not betray me. I didn't think he would do it, and I know he never would. And maybe, she said, the resistant had acted like that because the Gestapo had threatened his wife, or maybe they threatened his young son. We don't know all that happened, Noor said. We must not judge. Even while trying to stay one step ahead of the Gestapo, Noor remained a devout Sufi, a Sufi who did not judge. We cannot judge the action of another, Noor believed. We can only say, I must not do this. When we judge someone, she maintained, we may easily be wrong. And Noor refused to be wrong. Noor never lost her faith in her faith. In late 1943, November 43, she was caught by the Gestapo after that second attempt to escape. She was sent to that prison in Paris, in Pforzheim. She was kept in solitary. She was kept in chains. There are really very few details about what happened there. I do know that 6 months after Noor was brought there, a guard noted that her state of mind has worsened considerably. She's not able to read German. There's nothing for her to do. She's left alone, and she's left to herself. And the guard heard Noor murmur, my loneliness is unbearable. And the rest of Noor's murmuring was jumbled and incoherent. On September 12th, 1944, a train took Noor and 3 other female agents to Dachau. Reports vary about what happened next. Maybe the women were executed that night, maybe the next morning. Whenever it happened, most likely Noor was killed with a bullet to her head as she held hands with another woman. She was 30 years old. One of the great joys, I spoke before about Noor's idea of joy, and that is sacrifice. One of my ideas of joy was, while writing this book, was just meeting wonderful people wherever I went. People I did not expect to meet, people I'm very happy I met. There's an elementary school in Suresnes, Noor's hometown in France, and I arranged to interview an entire class of 3rd graders. And somewhere in the course of that mass interview, I asked them what they had learned from Noor Inayat Khan. And there's a little boy sitting right in front of me. He's waving his hands. I had no choice. I had to call on him. He was probably named Jacques or Pierre. I said, okay, what did you learn from Noor Inayat Khan? And this little boy, this third grader, said, I learned that if my big sister falls into a hole, I should pull her out. And that's as good as I would hope a third grader could learn from Noor Inayat Khan. And there was also Sister Ermengarde. I did some skipping, so why don't you flip way ahead? I'm sorry, I know we're running tight on time. There's Noor playing her Veena. Thank you. There we go. That's me, obviously. I hope obviously by now. And that is Sister Ermengarde. She is the Mother Superior at the Catholic convent at Dachau. I met her when I was at Dachau, October 2017, researching the book. A Sufi told me that Mother Superior was very, very fond of Noor. She even had a photo of Noor on her desk, and Sister Ermengarde attended some of the yearly memorials for Noor. So I really wanted to meet her, and I interviewed her in 2017 for about an hour and a half. She even went so far as to say, without knowledge of the Pope, that she considers Noor to be a saint. And in the middle of that interview, I noticed that right next to us on the wall was a very large wooden crucifix, and of course Jesus was on it. So I just ad-libbed a question. I said, well, I'm sure you pray, to him and for him. Do you pray for Noor? She said, no, Arthur, I don't pray for Noor. I pray with Noor. Well, I don't usually hang around Catholic convents, but last September, I was invited to be the keynote speaker at yet another memorial service for Noor at the concentration camp. Sister Ermengarde couldn't attend, even though the convent was maybe 100 feet from where I was speaking. But my talk interfered with their scheduled prayers at the convent. But I was spending a few more days in Munich. I had some research to do. I was leaving, I believe, on Saturday. But Thursday of that week, I got a text that Sister Ermengarde really wanted to see me. And believe me, when Sister Ermengarde summons you, you go. So I went to the convent the next day. That's when this photo was taken. And she was waiting for me just inside the entrance. And first thing she says, after giving me a wonderful hug, is, Arthur, how many people attended your talk? And I said, oh, when two or more gather in my name. And luckily, she cracked up, and I knew from 2017 that she had a wonderful sense of humor, and she proved it once again. And another person I met was Mary, Noor's 88-year-old sister-in-law. I interviewed Mary at the family's home in Surrender. We saw a photo of it before. And in the course of that interview, I asked Mary what was possibly in Noor's nature that led her from believing in fairies and writing numerous poems about them all the way up into her teens, and then resisting the Nazis, and then trying to escape twice from a heavily guarded prison in Paris. And Mary paused for a moment, and then she looked directly into my eyes, and she said, Noor always believed in the unbelievable. Actually, as soon as I heard Mary say that, I thought to myself, thank you. You just gave me the last sentence in my book. Go home and read it again if you haven't. It is indeed the last sentence in my book. And that, I really think, is the ultimate lesson from Noor Inayat Khan. We should always believe in the unbelievable, in the far-fetched and the good, in our incredible capacity for courage, in our unquenched quest for truth, for wisdom, for ourselves. For we are more than what we seem, and the world is more than what we see. And even the most unlikely of us, like Noor, can make the most improbable of differences in the short time allotted to us on this earth, even if, as Noor said, our hearts are broken. At that juncture, she was sure, as am I, that the real comes forth and our work truly begins. Thank you very much. I didn't say how I learned about Noor because I was trying to give people a reason to leave. This is a bonus for those of you who are staying. I learned about Noor because I got an email some years ago from friends who make documentary films, and basically they were telling me that a new film they made was going to be on PBS very soon. It's called Enemy of the Reich, and I recommend it. It's one of the best films made about Noor. Seeing the film, reading their PR release convinced me to write a book about Noor. One of the first things I did was to email a man named Pierre Zia. He is the head of the Sufi organization in the United States. He was then living in upstate New York, New Lebanon, New York, west of the Berkshires, and he agreed to be interviewed. And about a week before I went up there, I emailed him asking if he had any idea what could possibly have sustained Noor while she was in that horrible prison in Pforzheim, Germany, in solitary, almost starved, and in chains. And he sent me a verse from the Bhagavad Gita, because he had heard that helped Noor. And it was interesting. Anything in the Bhagavad Gita is interesting, but I wanted to compare that translation to my own. So I reached out on my shelf, I pulled down my Bhagavad Gita, hadn't opened it for years, it was dusty. I finally found the verse. What I found strange, since this volume dates back to my youth, was that a long time ago I had put brackets with pencil around one verse. And it was the same one that Pierre Zia said had helped and sustained and kept Noor spiritually intact in that prison. So I took this with me to the abode of the message in upstate New York, and I wanted to show it to Pierre Zia during our interview. Found the page, about to hand it to him, and I noticed that some time ago I had not just put brackets around this one verse, I had also written in the margin, Karma Yoga equals liberty. And Karma Yoga is a form of yoga in which you do selfless work for others, which of course is what Noor did when she was in France for the SOE. Karma Yoga equals liberty. Then I handed the book to Pierre Zia, and he sort of shrugged, and he said, well, of course, liberty. That was Noor's last word at Dachau before she was killed. So I leave you with that. I leave you with liberty, and I leave you with Noor Inayat Khan. I'll see you outside if anybody wants books signed. Thank you.